All right, we are live, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Let's Talk Lake County. I'm your host, David Rich. I have an extremely special guest on tonight, the founder of You Are the Power and also the 2020 vice presidential candidate for the Libertarian Party, Spike Cohen. Sir, how are you?
I'm doing great, David. Thanks for having me on again, man.
Absolutely. I want to thank Brian Lambrecht for setting this all up because it was his idea. And it's a great topic. And then, having a philosophy degree, ethics is a branch of philosophy. And of course, human dignity falls under that scope. And as a libertarian myself, and you, of course, are as well, it's also it's essential to that political philosophy. You betcha. So real quick, how are things?
Very well. Very well. I'm actually headed to, on Friday, I am headed to New Hampshire to speak with lawmakers there in Manchester about the legislation that we got passed in Georgia that fixes a lot of the problems that they have with their child protective service system there, and what, based on our assessment of their somehow much worse child protective service system in New Hampshire, what they can do to what we're proposing that they do to change it. So just another day of doing the stuff that we do.
Yeah, no, that's great. And this is through the You Are the Power.
Yep. This is yeah. So the summit is actually called the Hazlitt Summit. It's put together by Young Americans for Liberty. But they bring people to their, I guess, Hazlitt fellows who are like Yale alumni that have gotten elected to office. And so we go to kind of talk with them about, libertarian policies, philosophy, all sorts of stuff. And so we're going to be I'm going to be focused on the legislation, but also in the underlying idea behind it, which we're going to be getting into, which is the idea that everyone, the way that each one of us operates the best is to be treated like an individual human being. Like that at its core, in order for us to be able to thrive at our best, the best flourishing we can have, the happiest we can be, is when we are treated like a human being. And so at its core, when we break down any of these bad policies, it really comes down to people being treated like something other than a human being. So in this case, it's children and parents being treated like a great way to get federal funding if they're okay with just ripping an innocent family apart. Whereas if they looked at these families as people and wanted to treat them the same way they, who are also people, would like to be treated, they'd never even dream of doing something like this.
Yeah, no, that kind of, it's a good segue into like kind of kicking off the conversation is like, good thinking about the history of human respect and human dignity and how it's sort of changed over time, starting like back in like kind of tribal days where it was like family, tribe only, and a very collectivist sort of ideology that expanded to like then other citizens. And then like, it's almost like, a lot of people are concerned like internationally, like globally about each individual human being. Not everybody is, there's still war and all that stuff. And there was a religious element to it as well. Like, I was thinking about the history of it and some of the pretty barbaric stuff that happened, let's say before the Enlightenment kind of kicked off. Some pretty atrocious things, invading other people's territory because they weren't of your religion, and stuff like that, and killing them, apostates and heretics and so on and so forth. But at the center of that, which I think is more recognized now, at least without an actual number in front of me, is the golden rule: to treat others as you would have them treat you. Yep. And each person, I would pretty much guess, would want to be treated as an individual.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say I can't really speak for other religions or faiths that much because I'm not as well versed in them. I would say specifically in Christianity, I'm actually a Christian. In Christianity, in order to use your religion as a reason to commit atrocities against other people, to invade them, to try to force them to believe in your religion, which by the way doesn't actually work. Actual saving faith needs to be a choice that someone is making.
It has to be a genuine choice.
It's not someone puts a sword or a gun to your head and says, take Jesus as your savior. Oh, okay, fine. That's not actual. You didn't just save that person.
That's not an actual conversion. No,
that's not an actual conversion in any real way. Maybe in other faiths, but certainly not in ours. And but so anytime that anyone is doing these things, enslaving people, committing genocides against people, any use of force that isn't defensive, if they're using Christianity as their reason for doing it, they have to ignore just about every single thing that Jesus said when he was walking this earth. especially when it comes to things about not just, we hear a lot about love your neighbor as yourself, or do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But he also says to love your enemies and to pray for those who persecute you. That doesn't mean you can't defend yourself against them. I mean, at You Are the Power, we're engaged in a kind of civil defense of insisting that these people do the right thing and not laying off of them until they do. But even then, we're supposed to do from a prayerful desire for reconciliation. Even if we're in a situation where we're having to use force to defend ourselves against someone else, and this is a tough one for people. It's proof that we can't live up to God's standard 100%. We're actually called to do that without going into a place of hate, which is a very tough thing to do, to use force to defend yourself, but still deep down desire love and reconciliation during that. And yet that's what we're called to do. And so while You Are the Power is not in and of itself a religious organization, the very baseline, if I am to love you like myself, I can love this computer. I can love my car. I can love all sorts of objects and different aspects of my life. I can't love those things like myself, because the only way I can love something like myself is to treat it the way that I want to be treated, which is something explicit and specific to a human being. And so even though the principle of human respect isn't necessarily tied to any specific religion, in order for me to love my neighbor as myself, or my enemy for that matter, I have to first, at the very base, I have to recognize them and acknowledge them and treat them like a human being. I have to respect the fact that they are individual human beings, and then build it out from there. That has to be there in order for me to actually do what I'm called to do.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point, and or set of points. And I know that Christianity is specific to the salvation of individual people. Where other religions are like, the nation is chosen, the collective group of people is saved, fight through God's grace or whatever it is, or calling. Christianity is focused on the individual people being saved, choosing to be saved themselves. So you still have free will, you have reason, you have all the things accounted for there. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is. When you get into the weeds of it, we actually believe that the gift of our salvation, the gift of our faith, comes from God, comes from the Holy Spirit, and that it's actually that every single aspect of this universe, including the choices we make, are something that is already preordained eternally before the universe was created. But from our perspective, from our aperture, it's us out here making choices, which is why sometimes people get confused in the Bible, where it will say at the same time, God's preordained everything, but then it's constantly telling us things that we should be doing and shouldn't be doing. And it's like, well, wait, why should we be doing or not doing this if it's already all been preordained? That's part of what's been preordained. And how we end up choosing, even though we don't know necessarily how we're going to choose next, that's already been preordained. But yeah, from our perspective, we are making the free will choice whether or not to engage with the gospel in the first place, whether or not we believe it, and then if it's a true saving faith, not just a intellectual assent, but that we actually want to turn to God and do good. It's not by our good deeds that we're saved, but our good deeds are evidence of that faith. All of that to say, yes, Christianity from that perspective, even though we are already, those of us who believe and those of us who choose to turn our lives to God, are a chosen race amongst all other people eternally before the universe was created. From our perspective, as we can best live it out, we're out here making individual choices for ourselves. In the same way that, like, God already knows every meal that we're ever going to have, but we don't yet. And so when we get there, we figure out what we want to eat for lunch or dinner or whatever. And while within Christianity, a very important part of it is communal worship, is coming together as believers, holding one another accountable, keeping each other, what's the word I'm like, encouraged in the faith, communing together with the Lord at the Lord's Supper and partaking in communion and all these different aspects to it. Ultimately, we're called to actually make sure that none among us has any needs, voluntarily, not through government or anything like that, but voluntarily make sure that none among us has any needs that aren't being met, and still keeping up our end of the bargain and everything else. But so even though there's that, we are called to do that communally, mostly to kind of keep ourselves in running the race of doing what we're supposed to do. ultimately it's like you said, it's an individual personal choice. It is the individual who is being saved. Right. It is the individual who is choosing whether or not to engage in that communal worship. And it is supposed to be a choice. Multiple times in the Bible, it talks about I forget which book in the Old Testament, God says, I give you life and I give you death. Therefore, choose life. He's telling you, you can go the way of ruin if you wish. That you can do that, and that will happen. So there's really no justification for this idea of like, well, we're going to make people do the right thing. No, you can make them not harm anyone else, but we're not called to make people do the right thing. People are called to do the right thing as evidence of their contrite heart and their desire to please God. Yeah,
very cool. Well said. So I looking it up, and I wrote that essay for Brian, the philosophy of human dignity, and that's evolved over time as well and changed over time. Obviously, different philosophers have different ideas, but like my take on it is that philosophy is about living a good rational life, being a rational human being, and choosing the good over the bad or the good over the evil. But what do those things mean, like in practice? Like, what is good? We know generally what good means. We know generally what bad means. But what does goodness and badness look like in day-to-day life? Yeah. And the idea is that everything is reducible down to identity, or ontology is a kind of a fancy word in philosophy, and that's what the thing or person is, in essence, essentially. So, the definition, as far as I would take it, the definition of a human person is a rational moral agent with free will and a body. Okay, and so the notion, let's stick with like the rational moral agency part and the free will part. Body just means you have a body. You have the capacity to reason, which means you get to choose for yourself. Okay, you're a moral agent, which means you're responsible for your behavior and can be held accountable for your behavior. And you have free will, so your choice is free, not determined by any sort of external factors or determining factors. So to treat, like Aristotle said, something like, to treat something or someone as it is not, or not as it is the apex of irrationality. It's like if you build a table and you never use it. I mean, you can do that. It's just kind of stupid. Yeah. It's an irrational thing. It's just dumb to do. So to treat somebody as if they're not a rational moral agent with free will is problematic or irrational. That's kind of the philosophical position.
Yeah, and that can be, I would say that's a useful rubric at least 9 times out of 10, if not more. I think generally speaking, you can use that as your presupposition or your rubric that you're using in building out, okay, this is a human being, and this is the just a basic level of respect and dignity for the fact that they're a human being. Right. And that part trips people up sometimes, in that when I'll talk about human respect, they'll go, but I don't even know the person, and I think respect is earned. And I'll say, okay, yeah, respect is in like what you think about them as an individual, like what their individual merits and demerits. I'm talking about respecting the fact that they are individual human beings. So the example I use is like when we go to New Hampshire, I'll use this at events. I'll say, when I got to this, in order for me to go from where I live to here, I had to fly here or drive here or whatever. And I had to come into relatively close proximity to, say, thousands, tens of thousands, however many thousands of complete and total strangers. And I had a reasonable expectation that none of them were going to harm me in any real way. I wasn't going to get assaulted. I wasn't going to be killed. I wasn't going to be, robbed. No major horrific, unsurvivable or life-altering thing was going to be done to me by any of these people, none of whom I knew. And for that matter, I don't know what their intentions are. I don't know what their goals are in life. I don't know how much they, how much they care about others or anything like that. But I have a relatively reasonable expectation that they're operating from the same kind of unspoken, often unthought default, that we just kind of treat each other like human beings, in that we won't, for example, try to squash each other the same way we would like a bug. Like, you're walking and we're having all these great thoughts, and you didn't even necessarily mean to, you step on a roach or something and you go, it's on my shoe, I don't like that, whatever. You don't necessarily feel any remorse. And there's not like, man, how do I make sure never to do that again? It's just this inconvenient thing that happened. Well, that's a life that was just terminated, whether you meant to or not, but it's not a human. And so we have a higher level of respect that comes from that. So again, as a as just the most baseline of treatments that human beings owe other human beings is a simple respect for the fact that they are a human being, and the logical, natural, at least somewhat empathy derived conclusions that come from that. You don't have to necessarily love them, although as Christians we are called to, but at the very least just respect that they're human beings and treat them accordingly.
100%. Yeah, absolutely. And tying this into government coercion, the prime example is policing. And I think we mentioned this when you were on my Green Party show, is that when a police officer arrests you, when they shackle you in chains and put you in a cage, okay, that is literally the police officer taking some sort of accountability of your person, of your body,
right,
which can be easily called ownership. He's in a sense taking ownership of your body because you're not allowed to leave, and they are responsible for you.
Yeah,
greater than you're responsible for yourself. Now you put those two together, that pretty much means ownership.
Yeah.
Now it goes against the rational moral agency and free will of an individual to do that to them. Now there are practical reasons to do it. We don't want serial killers running around.
Of course, right.
But I mean, I think that in this country is, the government has really lost sight of what it means to, how severe and serious it is when a cop does that, when they shackle you in chains and put you in a cage. Let that imagery sink in for a second. That's not a great thing. It's something we need to minimize as much as possible. If you're a violent offender, then yes, you should be shackled in chains and put in a cage and taken out of society. 100%. What would you say about that?
Yeah. So it is, again, like the difference between defense and offense, right? Like, so if I use violent force against someone who's trying to mortally harm me or someone near me, well, I've done it, I think, an objectively good or at least defensible thing, right? Even if you think that's not, even if you're a pacifist or something, you at least understand that there's a difference between that and me being the one trying to kill someone out of nowhere or out of anger or for some unjustifiable reason I'm using violence against someone else. In the same token, taking custody of someone or ownership of someone, detaining someone, shackling them, holding them against their will, potentially putting them in a cage for a significant period of time, that's an act of violence. Now, they might comply with it, but it's still an act of violence. You're doing violence to their autonomy and to their body and to their whatever plans they had for that day and so forth. And so then again, it becomes the difference between, are you doing this because they're a violent offender or because there's an exigent circumstance where you think they might be an immediate threat to themselves or others, and so you're temporarily holding them just to see what it is. If it's something like that, then it can at least be argued, okay, this is a defensive thing. They're doing it to defend themselves or others. And if we have a government and we have people that are enforcers of certain laws and standards, including like basic ideas of non-aggression, then okay, then that's something that very few people are going to have much of a hard time with, especially if it's for something like a violent person or someone that was doing things that was harmful to other people. But if it's not, if they've wrongfully arrested someone, or if they've arrested someone for something that arguably shouldn't be a crime, it has no victim, maybe we might both think it's not a great idea to do that thing, or we might even think it's morally wrong to do that, but it's not directly harming anyone else, and it's not infringing on anyone else's lives or their liberties or their autonomy or their property or anything like that. Then, well, now we're talking about violence that's not being used for defense. And so now that officer shackling someone and holding them against their will is at least no different than you or I doing it, not being officers. It's now kidnapping and whatever other crimes we've committed, assault or whatever else, in order to commit that thing. And I would argue it's actually worse, because when you and I do it, you or I did that, we wouldn't be doing it under the color of law. We'd just be doing it, and then we'd probably get in trouble for it, and no one would do much to defend us. But if you're doing it as a police officer, you have this entire system of defense around you. You have, unions representing you, or state attorneys representing you. You have the color of law. You have this presumption. You have immunity. Although we've actually been instrumental in getting some officers denied qualified immunity, which is pretty cool. But that you get more often than not, you get some level of immunity for any actions that you cause. You get this sort of public presumption that you were probably in the right, or maybe you overreacted, but you were just doing your job. So in a way that makes it worse than a private sector kidnapper doing it. And I think we need to look at it that way. I think we've gotten too quick, and maybe it was conditioned watching shows like Cops or Hawaii Five-0 or whatever. But whatever it caused that to be that way, I think we've kind of lost the forest for the trees, that there are a lot of people who are being kidnapped for either no reason at all or for not great reasons that anyone should be kidnapped. And I think we should look at it that way.
I absolutely believe that. Yeah, 100% we should look at it that way. And that's one of the things that like, it's sort of like I said, the definition, my definition of a person, ranges over all persons. It's a definition. It's a generalization. But it's equal to everybody, right? Okay, because it's essential to you as a human person. Cops are people too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, that's like, it drives me batty when like governments like make change the definition of things in their favor so they can have power over the rest of us. Yeah. We get to go ahead and kick the crap out of you, but you don't get to fight back.
Yeah,
that's just stupid. That's hugely offensive. It really bothers me a lot. Like, that the governments get to do things that the people don't get to do. Arm themselves to the teeth with, nuclear weapons, and we, can't even have a gun.
Right. Right.
That kind of thing. Which is, as far as I understand, a very libertarian principle.
Very much so. And it's one of the ones that seems the most extreme to most people. Right. And I've learned to unpack it by going, whatever you think the government should be able to have, let's just remember that they're people who are given way more authority to use those weapons than we are. So I'd argue that if they're able to have those weapons with more license to use them than you or I would have, then why can't we have them? And any argument someone can come up with, well, but you could do it. Well, they have done that. So why can they have it? Like, okay, great. You're in favor of gun control. You don't think that you or I should have an assault weapon. Why can they? Like, why are you okay? Well, they're the government. Yeah, but that's actually an argument against them, because unlike me, if the government was a person and had to go through a background check, they'd get denied immediately, and they'd probably get reported for all the crimes that they committed, and they'd go to prison for it. Like, I mean, if anything, the government's track record alone gives them far more presumption that they shouldn't have weapons than any one of us. Like, they at scale do far more. But I like what you said about cops are people too. It's funny, even when we first started You Are the Power, we were like, the whole purpose of this is to drive home the concept of respecting people as individual human beings. But even we would often talk about the government or the city council or the such and such sheriff's department or the such and such police department, even though we would have people contact the individual officers or officials or attorneys or like state attorneys or mayors or whatever else that were involved in this, we'd still kind of talk about them as this sort of monolithic thing. And so not only were we kind of making it sound like a harder thing to deal with, we weren't saying contact these 3 people who are just like you and tell them to do the right thing. We were saying contact this agency through these people. But we also we were kind of being a little hypocritical without meaning to, because, we were talking about, well, they need to treat us like individual human beings, and the collective government, need to, acknowledge our individual humanity. And at some point it really started to click a couple years ago, where it was like, yeah, they're people too. And yes, they did bad things. And yes, we need to every bit as persistently and insistently demand that they do the right thing. But we need to focus on the fact that these are human beings, not just because that's what we call for everyone to do. So we need to do it in this case too, but it's also more effective. We're no longer fighting the government. We're telling these individual human beings who probably don't even realize how bad whatever they did was, that it was pretty bad and that they shouldn't do that. And and before we started doing it this way, we had reached a point where we had I think a cumulative right around 85-90% success rate, which is insane. I mean, that's an incredible success rate. Yeah. Since we really implemented this in earnest about 2 years ago, we have won every cause. We have had a 100% success rate for going on 2 years now.
That's
and
awesome.
I think a major change of that. Now, I attribute, I don't think you get perfect level without some kind of moving of the Holy Spirit. But I will say this, I think part of how that has manifested itself is that we are treating them like our neighbor. We are praying for them, even though as they persecute us. We are reaching them from even the wording that we use when we have people contact them with our email wording templates. It is increasingly about a desire for reconciliation. Join us in doing the right thing. You have to know this wasn't the right thing. Join us in doing the right thing. Sometimes they resign. Sometimes they don't even want to do the right thing. They resign and someone else comes and does the right thing. Fine. If that's what you want to do, fine. Sometimes, I'd say probably most often, they do the right thing, and it's pretty obvious it's for political expediency. We just had this with the Cortland, New York town council or city council, where they're suddenly going, there was a proposal to require disabled people who use wheelchairs to get licenses and pay fees to be allowed to use the wheelchairs that they're required to use because they're disabled. Yeah. And so we found out about it. And we the day before their council meeting, which was yesterday, we had them, we had people contact them, and they started sending emails back to people going, oh, this was a huge misunderstanding. There's some misinformation out there. This is entirely voluntary. We're just trying to make sure that no one's wheelchairs or bikes or anything are being robbed. And so we're just giving people a chance to license it to their name. Well, that's not what it initially said. So what that looks like is they backed off for reasons of political expediency. Fine, we'll take it. But then there are other times that people legitimately see the error of their ways and they join us and fix it. The head of Georgia's Division of Family and Children's Services, DFACS, their CPS agency in their state, she contacted us privately and said, how do I fix this? I didn't know it was this bad. So we gave her a bulleted list of stuff to do privately. She wasn't doing press conferences and magnanimous speeches. Privately, she took our list and immediately made it policy. And then privately, she worked on state legislators to get those changes codified into law, which is called Ridge's Law, and it passed unanimously. That was a reconciliation.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Yes, it was. It is a reconciliation. That's awesome, dude. Good for you. So a couple of the things you said, like about government. Individuals are people and governments are not. Governments don't have agency like individual people do. Like this whole what was Citizens United? Is that what it was? That said corporations are people.
The corporations can be treated as people. Yeah,
that's nonsense. It's such nonsense.
Yeah.
They might speak with one voice, but I mean, it doesn't make them an agent. That doesn't mean they have agency. They don't. It's just silly. Only individuals can be, like you were saying, treating your neighbor. Loving your neighbor, treating your neighbor as yourself. That includes like holding people accountable, like you're talking about the cops and the government, stuff like that too. You do something wrong as an individual person, then other people are going to hold you accountable. You there? I think you froze up. Spike, can you hear me? Spike, you there? We lost Spike. I'm trying to turn the light up and it's not working. Come on. See if he comes back. So I had to do it. And there's a comment section on the top right there if you want to say anything. I just texted Spike. Let's see what's going on. Okay, you're back.
Hey, sorry about that. My computer just turned off. So
that's okay.
I just immediately booted it back up and got it started.
All right, cool. So, where were we? We're talking about like governments not having agency, neither corporations.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
You broke off somewhere in there, but I just finished talking about how we'd actually had people like reconcile with us, and I lost you as you were responding to that.
Yeah, I think.
But you said people in government have individual agency, and then
Oh, and then I think I was talking about loving your neighbor includes because you're responsible for your behavior, you can be held accountable for it too.
Yeah.
So like loving you might be called tough love. I don't know what you want to say it, but if you do as an individual person, if you do something wrong, you should be held accountable.
Yep.
Legitimately wrong. Not again, like we talk, laws make up all sorts of stupid stuff that isn't morally problematic.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's just an imperative to actually treat individuals within the government or any agency or collective as individuals. There's this whole. This might be a silly analogy, but that the first rule of leadership is that everything is your fault. That's not true. You're not actually responsible for everything one of your employees does. You might be accountable as a leader, but if one of your employees does something wrong, do you fire the CEO as well? No, that would be stupid. The individual employee did something wrong. Does that make sense? That seems kind of weak to me, but does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I came from the business ownership world, and I think it's well understood that this is a bit tongue in cheek when we say it's everything's your fault. But the idea is to try to almost have that mindset in that you're accountable for it. Right. It might be someone else's fault, but it's your problem. Like that's
a perfect way to say it. It's their fault, but it's your problem.
It's their fault, your problem. If I'm a business and someone I've contracted to, or someone that works for me, or whatever, someone else does something and it falls in my lap, I can go, well, that's not my problem, but it, or I didn't cause that, but it's better for me to go, listen, everything, all bucks stop here. And so I'm going to deal with it according to that. Now, to your point, that might mean firing someone. That might mean reprimanding someone, or it might mean, hey, that person didn't know that, so let me correct it and teach them the right thing, or they've got too much on their plate, I need to bring someone else in, or whatever the thing is. It means it means that the person involved may have to be held accountable, but I got to be the one doing it because I'm in charge of that. But no, the reality is we have agency. Those of us who don't have any kind of severe intellectual disabilities or anything like that, we have the agency to make choices for ourselves. And no, they're not going to be perfect. And yes, we are going to fall short. In fact, this is actually Christian theology is rife with this concept that you got to try to do the right thing. You're going to fail a lot, but you still have to try. And so even from a non-religious standpoint, we can still acknowledge that, we're not going to be perfect, but that's why accountability is so important. And so then to your other point about, loving your neighbor sometimes looks like going to your neighbor and saying, I was wrong. How do we fix this? Like, I'm sorry. I didn't do this right. I didn't know, or I did know, or whatever. How do we fix this? Can we fix this? And the first thing is, I'm sorry. And so a lot of the, when we have had these examples of reconciliation, the first part of that was someone saying, I was wrong. I'm sorry. And now what can we do about it? Because we don't want people to just wallow in their misery. Again, going back to Christianity, we aren't called to just beat our chest and go, I'm so broken. Like, we're supposed to do something about it. You repent for it. You confess it. You learn to turn away from that thing. That's all part of the sanctification process. Applying that to this, part of the initial process is the contrition and repentance. But then the next step is, how do we fix it? And how do we fix it together? And so we would prefer, when we reach out to these officials, we'd prefer that they go, wow, you know what? Wow, yeah. Okay, let's fix this. I'm very sorry. Let's think, what are we going to do to fix it? And sometimes the answer is not pretty. I mean, sometimes the answer is people have to be fired, or someone might even have to be prosecuted for something, or be held civilly liable for something. That can happen. But there needs to be that contrition in the first place, and then from there we figure out how to fix it. But if instead they'd rather do something politically expedient and we still win, and the people we're helping, get them off their back, they win, I'll take it. And if the people resign and someone else replaces them and does the right thing, I'll take that too. I'd prefer reconciliation, though.
Yeah, no, for sure. So I want to ask you, like, how does this notion of the concept of human dignity, how is it pervasive in the Libertarian Party, libertarians themselves? Is it something that's talked about a lot? Like, I know it's within the political frame or philosophical framework, 100%.
Yeah.
But like, I had Mary Ruwart on a few weeks ago. You know Mary, right?
Oh yeah, Dr. Ruwart. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and she was talking about the non-aggression principle. I mean, how she got that from her when she was a Catholic as a kid. From loving your neighbor. And she says she's not a practicing Catholic now, but that it really kind of like they coalesce very well together. Again, a very biblical sort of underpinning to that. But I mean, is it pervasive in the Libertarian Party? Are people talking about, like, explicitly talking about human dignity?
I think that we at You Are the Power, and other people who and organizations who have really glommed onto this idea of individual human respect, we've certainly pushed it forward. And human dignity and respect, they're interchangeable. You could say either. But the idea of respecting people as individual human beings, it's always been there. Like you said, it's always been, implicit in the non-aggression principle is that you don't do this to people because they're people. And even so, like, we often will use terms like individualism, which sounds like we're saying every person's on their own, every man for themselves. Don't bother me. Yeah, me. All I care about it's not meism. It's not like a type of egoism necessarily. Some people do take it that way. Sure. Individualism is respect. Like Ayn Rand said that the smallest minority is the individual, and put a slightly less autistic way is saying that every single one of us is implicitly unique to ourselves. Like, you can only collectivize us to others and group us in with others so much, because there's never going to be another exact you, and there's never going to be another exact me. And there's something inherent there that we just recognize and understand. And even if you do collectivize it a little bit, we're all humans. So you can't really escape that part of it. So I think the nomenclature has been changing. I'll tell you, part of the biggest reason why I really like the principle of human respect, besides the fact that it's something you can, like, explain to a 7 or 8 year old and they will probably get it. And, like, you can say something like, hey, I think that people should treat other people like people. I think we should respect each other and not do bad things to each other. And I think that when we do those bad things to each other, I think we're a lot less happy as a result. And they go, well, yeah, why are you telling, the 8-year-old's like, yeah, everyone knows that. Like, it's a very straightforward thing. Whereas the non-aggression principle, which is a different way of saying kind of the same stuff, it's a little bit more cerebral. But the other problem is it doesn't really answer the question as to why. I remember during the campaign, one of the first times in, like, one of these types of interviews where I was telling someone about the non-aggression principle. And I'm like, yeah, well, it basically posits that we don't use aggression against each other. We don't rob people. We don't assault people. We don't impose ourselves on people. We don't violate their lives or liberties or property. And I remember the first person was like, why? And I was like, what do you mean, why? Because it's wrong. And they're like, what if I need it? And I remember, like, one example someone gave is like, what if I need healthcare and someone really rich has a bunch of money, and if I got their money, then I could have the healthcare I need. Tell me why I shouldn't do that.
Right.
And it was a tough one for me because I was like, because that's theft and it's wrong. And they were, I don't care. Like they literally didn't care. And so part of what the principle of human respect does is it approaches this as like a natural principle, not a more, you can derive a moral principle from it. You can derive a slew of moral principles from it, but the natural principle is the same as like a natural principle of gravity or electromagnetism. You can take those things and derive all sorts of amazing things from your understanding of it, but you can't debate it. Like you can't effectively go, well, I don't think gravity's real. And, why should I believe in gravity? It's like, you don't have to. You're still on the
you also
ground
don't
right
start
now.
floating upward, right?
Yeah. You're not floating right now because it exists, and not only does it exist, but it exists in a very precise and consistent fashion. It's not only not the reason that you're not floating into the ether. It's also the reason you aren't being squished into the ground and completely obliterated. It's at this current stasis and has remained that way because it's a natural principle. So if we apply that to human respect, the natural principle of human respect is that anytime that someone is not respected as an individual human being, anytime force or coercion or theft or fraud or threats are used against them, that individual is on the balance less happy, less harmonious, less prosperous, less free, all the things we would judge less fulfilled in their life. They are worse off because that thing happened to them. That's just a natural thing that always exists. At scale, if we are all to varying degrees being treated like something other less than a human being, then we're all less happy as a result. And so for the vast majority of people, a moral principle they can derive from that is, I will respect people as individual human beings, and I should be respected as an individual human being. And so by approaching it that way, as this sort of natural principle from which an observable, kind of incontrovertible natural principle that we can then derive these moral principles, it's a much more easily defensible thing than, for example, the nap, which I agree with, and you probably agree with it, but a lot of other people are going to be like, yeah, maybe I don't agree with it. And we have to have an answer for that. The other thing I like about the principle of human respect is that it strips away a lot of the, again, it's a very simple thing that can be explained to the vast majority of people, and it strips away a lot of the philosophical / political / ideological language that naturally makes people's defenses go up. When people start hearing these $5 words, then, almost as like a gut reaction, they like immediately start going, wait, what are they telling me here? I got to do some research. I got to think about this a little bit more. Whereas if you present it as this, it was funny. I was recently being interviewed on a more progressive show a couple months ago, and I was saying all this stuff. And at one point the host goes, yeah, but Spike, the thing is, no one can disagree with what you're saying. And I went, great. And I started laughing. And I was like, yeah, that's fine. Nice. And he was like, no, but the thing is, you're not saying anything real. You're just saying platitudes. And I'm like, no. I'm saying libertarian policy. I'm just talking about it through the rubric of human respect. And I started applying it to stuff. And he had a real tough time with it because he's used to battling ideas like the invisible hand and the free market and these things that, they're boogeymen that he knows how to combat with his own boogeymen. And we can have a nice boogeyman fight with our different terms that we like to use. And instead I was like, no, I just think we should treat each other like human beings. And this is what that looks like. He had a really tough time arguing with that because he was like, yeah, I guess so. And to the point where he initially thought I was just on his show throwing useless platitudes at him before he realized, no, this is hardcore libertarianism. We've just found a nice way to distill it where it's kind of hard to disagree with it.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I'll have to check that out if I can get a link for that. Yeah, I mean, I think another way of saying some of what you just said is that we have moral intuition. We have a conscience. Unless you're a sociopath, which is very, 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 very few people in history and presently, we all have a moral sort of disposition in us already. I think I would say it comes from that, our capacities for reasoning and moral agency. Yep. But okay, I mean, there's other ways of putting it. There's, you're a divine spark. You're made in the image of God. That's another God breathed. Yeah. God breathed. And I think that's just a really you sit somebody down, the guy thinks like it's okay to or at least arguing that it was okay to take money from a rich person to give himself health care. You just ask him search your soul, man. Do you really truly believe it's okay to steal something from people? I mean, do you really believe that? Let them kind of like look into their own conscience and be like, no, I don't really believe that's okay. But that kind of thing.
And so I did, maybe not quite to that degree, but I would kind of push back like, but you don't really think that. And often they would say things like, well, I think that they got it from stealing. And so I feel like I'm just stealing back and stuff like that, which is, again, why instead of getting into an ideological debate over where the theft started and, how that applies to non-aggression and so forth, if you take all as far of a step back as you can and go, listen, we're all human beings here, whatever you are, whether you are in the government, whether you are a voter, whether you're a non-voter, whether you're the CEO of a insurance company or a healthcare provider or a policymaker who creates the regulations that these different companies have to abide to or whatever else, whatever your capacity is, whatever your lot in life is there, if we are respecting people as individual human beings on a relatively as consistent a basis as we can and holding one another to account to do so and understanding that that's what the account is. It's not protect me necessarily. It's not, make things easier for me or give me what I need. It's respect me as an individual human being. If enough of us start from that perspective, a lot of these other things aren't going to be tolerated at scale because we'll see it for what it is, us and them being dehumanized. And so it kind of strips away, again, it strips away the ideological language that gets people up in arms. Because if I say to someone like, well, yeah, but you wouldn't steal. Like, you don't think it's right to steal. You don't think it's right to steal. Most people would be like, well, yeah, no, but I feel like I'm just taking back what they took from me, right? Because they've been told we tax the rich because they took it from us. And part of the issue is that corporatism is kind of that. Like, a lot of some of the most powerful people, wealthy people on the planet, some of them got there largely by serving the market, serving the needs of consumers and through voluntary means. A lot of them didn't. So it's harder to make that argument. So instead you take a step back and say, listen, the longer we continue doing eye for an eye, the more damage is being done through a system by which all of us are not being treated like human beings, which leads at scale and on the whole to all of us being net less happy, less harmonious, less prosperous, less free, less every metric we would use to govern whether or not we're living a good life and are flourishing or not. So let's step away from that in every aspect. And it again, people will hear this and think that it sounds like pandering or platitudes. It's not. It's saying, you know what? I don't want to win an argument with you. Let's talk about what the real problem is here and apply it consistently across the board. And it because it leads to agreement more often than not, it seems like it's a platitude, but it's the exact opposite. It's as close to a panacea as I found, actually.
Oh, nice. That's very well said. I was going to ask you, like, how would you apply like non-coercion and human dignity in economics as a libertarian? Because you mentioned like the corporatism and that kind of thing. And as a libertarian myself, I would never want like a law made like forces, rich people or CEOs to like distribute their wealth. I mean, that's a Marxism galore. But I think that there's maybe they should, morally speaking, of their own volition, step up a little bit more and start kind of helping out more. Elon Musk, and this isn't designed to say that he should definitely do this, because I think the whole global economy would collapse if he did. But to put it in perspective, but Elon Musk is worth $220 billion. There are 8 billion people on the earth. He could literally give every single person $1 billion and still be 100 billionaire. I'm like, wow, that's really interesting to put it that way. But again, that you can't just make everybody billionaires overnight and everything's fine, because if everybody's rich, all of a sudden everything would just shut down. But it was just an interesting perspective. And I wonder to myself, should he, morally speaking, not legally, step up a bit more and do more for people? What would you say about that as a libertarian?
So it's interesting. I have some very close friends and associates who are in that billionaire and near billionaire set. And some of them are actually, in fact, some of them are the most philanthropic people that I know. And interestingly enough, some of them do so and wouldn't want me to name them in doing so. And whether they realize it or not, they're doing what Christ said to do. We're called to be generous to those in need and to not talk about it. Like to say that we should do it, but not to be like, yeah, I gave this much to this thing. And this part of the homeless shelter is named after me. That's the Cohen wing of the shelter. Like, we're called not to do that. We're called to like do it as quietly and silently as possible to just have it be done. But another part of this is, yes, they do altruism, but they also believe, like the true free marketeers that I know that are like hyper successful, they believe that what they do in serving the market, which is again just people, is amongst the greatest good that they can do by finding ways to provide their services or products or goods or whatever it is that they deal in the most efficient and value laden way possible, as much product for as little cost as possible, delivered as efficiently and conveniently as possible. They believe that serves the greater needs 100%. As much or sometimes even more than the just handing something to someone. And I got an interesting reverse perspective of this from a lady named Magat Wade, who you may want to have on your show at some point. She is an activist for free market reforms in Africa. She is from, I believe, Sierra Leone. And she talks about that, in the West, we go, we're going to give shoes and clothes and food to people in Africa who don't have enough. And she goes, okay, great. You just bankrupted all the farmers and the clothing makers and the shoemakers. They're all out of business. And then your stuff's all designed to fall apart because you buy more of it. So now in a few years, they need all that stuff again. And obviously food isn't permanent. And you've just put all the farmers out of business. So now we absolutely need your food aid because we weren't able to compete with seemingly endless free food, free clothing. And so there's actually a thing to be said about, not that you necessarily meant to do that, but there's a potential that at least at a certain level of scale that you can actually do some unintentional harm through focusing only on just giving to people instead of allowing people to provide for themselves and to provide for others through a market-based system. With that said, I will say in general, and I'm not even just calling out the Elon Musks of the world or anyone in particular, I would say in general, I think all of us, and I will even include myself in this because it's something I really try to spend a lot of time in and I probably still fail. I think a lot of us are still not as generous as we should be.
Oh, 100%.
And this is not and there should be a law that will do the opposite effect. I'm not saying laws or anything else. I'm saying that just knowing me, I can speak for myself here. I could probably be doing more than I do. And like I said, I don't talk about what I do or what I don't do or anything like that. But I can say, I think I can faithfully say that I could probably do more. I could probably give more. And so if I can say that about myself, it's likely true about at least a couple other people out there as well. And so I think defaulting to generosity in and of itself is a good thing. It is actually something, again, that we are called to do. It is a sign of someone with a heart towards sanctification and greater closeness with God. Is a legitimate desire to help others around them. I also understand if there are people who feel like a combination of giving and helping and whatever they can do in serving the market is also, or I keep saying the market, serving people through whatever good or service they're providing and doing so in a high value way is another way of giving back or contributing to others as well. So, but no, I think it's less the input output and it's more the where is your heart and are you allowing your heart for generosity to be a major factor in the decisions you're making. It doesn't mean you have to hand everything you own away to everyone else. It just means, are you looking at it from a standpoint of how can I maximally help those around me?
Right. Absolutely. No, speaking of human shortcomings, I was just realizing that my math about Elon Musk was way off.
Yeah, I didn't. It was a bit off.
But so now I'm gonna have to look up what I read because I read it. I was like, oh yeah, that sucks.
We could all get a noticeable amount of money from him, and he'd still be rich. Now, and you even mentioned
he could give 8 people $1 billion. He couldn't give 8 billion,
which is still pretty impressive. That's still an impressive thing.
I apologize, folks. Sorry about that.
Yeah, but even still, and I think I think this might have started with my generation or maybe the Gen X generation. When we think of wealthy people, and I, even knowing this isn't the case, will sometimes think of this in the back of my head. We think of Scrooge McDuck in his silo, his tower filled with gold coins, which he somehow was able to dive into without, breaking every bone in his body. And he would swim through it and he'd surf in it and he'd go up and he'd spit it out like water. and it had the properties of water somehow. But he just had all this cash and gold in this giant tower. And the reality is, and you alluded to this as well, like if Elon Musk really decided to just liquidate everything he owned and hand it off to other people, there would probably be like a lot of catastrophic economic things that would happen as a result of that would lead to a net reduction in people's prosperity. So it's not as clean or as simple as that. I would just say in general, I think there are very few of us who wouldn't do better to have a little bit more generosity behind just their overall day-to-day thinking of how they approach everything.
Yeah, no, like with your McScrooge analogy.
Yeah.
It reminded me, like, going back to like a more religious principles or standards, money can very easily become idolatry.
Yeah. Oh yeah. 100%.
You start worshiping it more than you would worship God, say.
Yep. Anything in your life that is more important to you than God is effectively an idol of yours. Or you're just not treating God with much importance in your life. So like, for example, the atheist, pretty much everything in their life is more important than God because they don't even believe God exists. But for someone who professes to be a believer, may very well be a believer, if this is where God is in their life, or even it's here, but their finances are here and their love life is here and their family's here and this is here, and they have different things. Those effectively become their idols, and they can in and of themselves be good things. But if you're putting them before God, you're idolizing them. And money is an easy one because we can trick ourselves. We can go, well, this is how I survive. And so this is, again, I feel like I keep going into a theological thing, but it does drive home a greater point. A lot of times when people look at the, like, for example, Jesus telling the wealthy young ruler to give away everything he has and to take on his cross and to follow, give everything to the poor and follow him. And the man walked away very sad. Right. And he says, truly I tell you, it's easier for a camel to go through the thread through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. And people think that means if you have a certain level of wealth, you're going to hell. And so first of all, almost all of us are wealthier considerably than that guy was by today's standards. So like, if that's true, we're all in a lot of trouble. What they forget is that right after that, the apostles say, well, then that who could possibly enter heaven? And he says, by man, things are impossible. By God, all things are possible. So he was actually using that to say you can't get into heaven on your own. The reason I bring this up is, in general, when the Bible talks about wealth, it often talks about it as a thing that can be used for good. Some of the earliest Christians some of them were wealthier and let their homes be used for church services. They didn't have church buildings. So there are multiple examples of where people use their wealth for good and for generosity, and they were credited as such, right? Right. It doesn't say money's the root of all evil. It says love of money, greed, the desire above all else to put money before and the accumulation of power and wealth above everything else. That's the root of evil. The idolization of it, idolization in general, is the root of evil.
Yeah, that's one of the things that perplexes me about like the religious right in this country and nationalism. Nationalism is another form of idolatry.
Yeah,
you put your country above your faith. I'm not saying you shouldn't love your country, but like as your scale chart there.
Yeah.
Here's God and here's America. Way up here.
And what they're doing, if you look at the history of that, you need look no further than Europe. What happens is, okay, so the state religion is Christianity, which means that the state is Christianity, which means that over time, the church becomes less and less the important part of Christianity. First, it's that the state goes, well, the church doesn't have to handle the charity stuff anymore. We'll do that. The church doesn't have to worry about, getting people together for common defense against those who would try to conquer us and force us into their religion. We'll take care of that. The state, the church doesn't have to, maintain certain moral standards. We'll do that. And then eventually, before you know it, the state's like, I don't know how much you guys need God. That seems kind of quaint and antiquated. And so you end up with the situation where it becomes highly secularist to the point where even the churches are very secularist, because what happened was people stopped turning to God and they turned to the people who said that they were acting as God in his stead. And so that is the very often what the trying to take Christianity and turn it into a political system that you're now politics becomes your God. It becomes your faith, and it becomes like a Christian scented, Christian flavored idolatry. But that's actually some of the most dangerous idolatry, because you might think you're doing Christianity, but read the Bible, you're not.
Right. No, that's very well said. Very well said. And we're at an hour. Did you have anything else you wanted to talk about?
I think it was going to be 80% talking about Christianity.
But no, I don't mind that.
No,
dude, I have a philosophy degree. I've studied tons of theology in the Bible and scripture, all that stuff. Tons.
What I find interesting is the common threads between like how you would apply Christian thought on these things to the kind of common sense, kind of basic rational philosophy, and how much there's interweaving there. Now, if you're not a believer, you might say that it's because, well, of course it would, because that's how all people think. If you are a believer, you'd say, well, of course it would, because that's these things are all, we all have the law inscribed in our heart, or whatever you want. But ultimately, whichever way it is, I would say it's the latter, but whichever way it is, ultimately there's a lot that's there that if you look at it consistently, it starts with, as we were saying, treating people like individual human beings. And I do so with the mindset of saying, and it's actually very helpful to me. I look at someone and I go, that's God's image I'm looking at, and I'm supposed to treat it that way. And when I look at them and they're acting like my enemy, and I'm told I'm supposed to love them, and I have a hard time doing that, I go, God loves and forgives me when I act like his enemy. And so he's calling me to do the same thing here, and I'm going to try my best to do it. So for me, it's very helpful to do. But the bottom line is we need to respect each other as individual human beings.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. I hope that what you just said spreads like wildfire, my friend, amongst
Thank you.
Not just the right-wing Christian community, but like everybody else, because I wholly agree with your sentiments.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, it's loving each other as yourself is where it should start.
Yep.
Just think about what that means and start acting on it. So, all right. Well, great. Thank you. Spike Cohen. You are the Power founder and VP candidate from 2020 for the Libertarian Party. Thank you so much for coming on the show, sir. I would love to have you on again, Spike. I know like you're the busiest person in the world. I get it. I talked to Brian enough. But maybe if you can, pencil me in maybe next year or something like that. I would like to talk more about just You Are the Power.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to talk about that.
Like you said, you've accomplished so much. And I get some updates here and there from your newsletter and from Brian. But I would love my viewers to hear more about it, because it's such an amazing organization. And you're such an amazing person for all that you do. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. And thank you for having me on. God bless, man.
You as well. Thank you. Hold on one second, Spike. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to Let's Talk Lake County. I'm your host, David Rich. Till next time, keep talking. Here we go. Oh, there's a little lag here.